Composing. Writing a melody in the major key. For this tutorial, we are going to use question 1 from section A of the 2011 Leaving Certificate Higher Level Composing paper. The first thing to check when you see the question is whether the given 4 bars are in the major or minor key. Using the checks mentioned in the first tutorial, for instance, what are the notes in bar 1? And is there a raised 7th in the minor key? We can establish whether the melody is major or minor. Just to clarify, this piece has 4 sharps in its key signature. This means the piece could be in E major or C sharp minor. In this question, the notes in bar 1 are consistent with the notes in the chord of E major as opposed to C sharp minor. Also, have a quick look for a raised 7th in the minor key. This would be a B sharp. Remember, if accidentals are present, this means sharps, flats, or natural signs. You should be alerted to the fact that this piece may be in the minor key. But this alone is not a sure sign that the melody is minor. Another thing to look for is whether or not the question asks you to modulate. As you are not expected to modulate in a minor key, the question might not mention modulation if the melody is in a minor key. However, do not take this as evidence of it being major or minor, as your exam paper could be reworded or worded differently every year. Having looked at all the indicators of a minor key in this question, we can be confident that this piece is in the major key, E major to be more specific. Now create a chord grid. No matter how confident you are writing melodies, you should always do this. Also, take your time doing this, as an incorrectly written chord chart could have a very bad effect on your melody. Here is what your chord grid should look like in the key of E major. Remember, you are not expected to use chords 3 or 7, so rule them out of your planning. Now check for an anacrusis. An anacrusis, or upbeat, is when we have an incomplete bar right at the beginning of your melody. The missing beats from this bar must be accounted for in the final bar of your melody. So, when combined, the beats of the first and last bar should make up one full bar. As you can see in this question, there is an anacrusis. You shouldn't fear an anacrusis, but there are a few common mistakes. For instance, less than 16 bars written. Remember, the first complete bar is bar 1, not the incomplete bar at the start. Incorrect phrasing. There must be an anacrusis at the start of every phrase. Each anacrusis must be the same duration, although not necessarily the same rhythm. Too many beats in the last bar. Remember, there should only be enough beats in the last bar to complete the first bar. Incorrectly placed anacrusis. It should complete an existing bar. So don't just put it at the start of every line. You may actually do this, and if you decide to put it at the start of every line, please make sure you don't have a bar line at the end of the previous line. Now map out the structure for your melody. Quickly and briefly, an overview of this is as follows, and this is just one of many recommended structures for composing a melody. We are going to have 4 phrases, each of 4 bars duration. The first phrase is given to us. We will call this the A phrase. The second phrase will be a slightly modified version of the A phrase and will end with a modulation to the dominant. We will call this phrase A1. We will call the third phrase B, and this will be a further development of the melody using sequences based on a motif from the A phrase. The melody should reach a climax at the end of the B phrase. Finally, the last phrase will be called A2, and we will base this on the A phrase again, and the melody will move towards Do, using a perfect cadence at the very end. Now, let's slow that down a little bit and look at it in a bit more detail. Remember, this is just one potential answer. It is just one of many recommended structures for composing a melody, but it is a good method which, if followed, should result in a good composition. Here is the process I have gone through while composing this melody. Very importantly, I have noted that there is an anacrusis. The anacrusis should complete an incomplete bar. Don't just place it at the start of a line. This applies to every phrase. While you may place it at the start of every line, you must ensure that if you are doing this, you have not placed a bar line at the end of the previous line. However, in class, we have gotten into the habit of starting or ending each line with the anacrusis, which starts the next phrase. Firstly, I have decided on a structure to my melody. A reminder, that is A, A1, B, A2. This is 4 phrases, each lasting 4 bars. The first phrase has been given to me, and I am going to call this phrase the A phrase. I am going to call the next 4 bars the A1 phrase, and for this phrase I am going to slightly modify the A phrase for the opening 2 bars, and I am going to base my melody around the same chord sequence as the beginning of the A phrase. In this case, the chords are E major, A major, and B major. I have been asked in the question to include a modulation to the dominant at a suitable point, and the end of the A phrase is a very strong place to do this. The dominant is the 5th step in the major scale. To modulate properly, insert a perfect cadence, that is 5-1, in the new key. In this case, that would mean using the chords of F sharp major to B major. Alternatively, think of it like this. T-do in the new key will give you your modulation. Or if you really get confused with terminology like modulate to the dominant, introduce a raised 4th in the key you are currently in at the end of bar 7, followed by the 5th note of the key you are currently in at the start of bar 8. Using this method, you don't have to think in the new key. In this case, a raised 4th followed by a 5th in the current key means using an A sharp followed by a B. Once you have completed this modulation, you immediately return to the tonic key. I am going to call the next 4 bars my B phrase. I am going to use rising sequences based on a motif from the beginning of the A phrase. In this case, I am taking the first half of bar 1 at the start of my B phrase. In the next bar, I am repeating this motif slightly higher. This is a sequence. And in the remaining 2 bars, I am introducing an imperfect cadence, which is a cadence ending on chord 5. I also want my melody to reach a climax or to peak here. This means that your melody should be consistently rising towards this point. Finally, in my A2 phrase, I am again going to slightly develop the A phrase. I like working towards the opposite tonic note at the end. For example, if the melody begins with high E, I like to work towards low E. If it begins on low E, I like to work towards high E. Always finish with a perfect cadence, which is 5-1. This gives your melody a sense of finality. Next, phrase marks and dynamics. Phrase marks are straightforward if there is no anacrusis, and you simply place them from the beginning of each line to the end of each line. That is assuming you have neatly placed 4 bars on each line. If there is an anacrusis, remember to start each phrase at the beginning of each anacrusis and end it before the beginning of the next one. Apply a variety of dynamic markings. 1 per phrase, such as mezzo piano, piano, mezzo forte, or forte, is fine. Don't go over the top here, but do consider maybe adding a crescendo at the end of your B phrase to strengthen the climax. The only remaining task is to select a suitable instrument. You are not expected to have an in-depth knowledge of orchestral instrument arranging here, so just make sure your melody is within the range of your instrument that you have chosen. Clarinet and violin, for instance, have a very wide range and are always pretty much safe bets. If you are choosing an instrument such as the flute, for instance, though, it can't go below low C. So keep that in mind. If your melody goes below low C, you won't be able to use the flute. Just to give it a bit more detail, the choices given to me in this question are oboe, violin, trumpet, clarinet. As I have a quick leap of an octave in the A phrase, I am going to rule out the violin, as the player might find this uncomfortable, although it is certainly playable. In my opinion, the oboe doesn't sound well as it moves to its higher register, and I believe the trumpet may sound more appropriate in this piece than the clarinet, particularly at the higher register, so I am going to choose the trumpet. Don't select an instrument until you have written your melody, as you can't be sure how your melody will develop, and you may end up writing an unsuitable melody for a pre-chosen instrument. As I said, though, you are not expected to have an in-depth knowledge of arranging for orchestral instruments. So just keep in mind those things we mentioned about the range of the instrument. The clarinet and violin have a very wide range, as does the piano, so you will be pretty safe choosing any of those. Try to stay away from the flute or oboe if your melody goes below low C. There you go. Best of luck, everyone.